This is the story of Miriam. She was the sister of Moses, a woman whose voice saved a child but later brought her to a place of humbling. Her life teaches us this lesson. Leadership is a gift, but influence without humility can become dangerous. Egypt was cruel in those days. Pharaoh's command had gone out. Every Hebrew boy must be thrown into the Nile. Death hung heavy over Israelite homes, but in one small house, a mother refused to obey. Jochebed hid her newborn for 3 months, silencing his cries as best she could. Yet a day came when hiding was no longer possible. Soldiers searched every alley, and neighbors whispered in fear. The baby's cries would betray them all. So a plan was made. A basket was sealed with tar and placed carefully among the reeds of the Nile. Jochebed kissed her son's forehead, tears streaking her cheeks. She turned to her daughter and whispered, "Miriam, watch him. Do not let your eyes leave him." Miriam nodded, her jaw tight. "I won't, Mother. I promise." When Jochebed fled with Aaron, Miriam stayed. She crouched low among the tall grasses, eyes fixed on the basket. The water lapped softly, and the air was heavy with silence. Though her heart pounded, she did not tremble. She knew her baby brother's life depended on her courage. Time stretched long. Then came voices. Miriam's eyes darted toward the sound of footsteps. Through the reeds she saw them. Servants of Pharaoh's household, carrying jars and cloths. At their center was a figure robed in linen, moving with grace and authority, Pharaoh's daughter. The women laughed lightly as they approached the riverbank, but one suddenly pointed. "A basket, my lady." The princess commanded it be pulled out. The lid was opened, and at once the baby's cry filled the air. The servants gasped, whispering nervously. The princess leaned over the basket. Her face softened. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she murmured. Miriam's breath caught. She knew this was the moment. If she stayed silent, the child's fate was uncertain. If she spoke unwisely, both he and her family could be destroyed. She forced her feet forward, stepping out from the reeds. Her voice was steady, though she was only a girl. "Shall I go and bring you a Hebrew woman to nurse him?" The servants looked startled, but the princess's gaze lingered on Miriam. Then she nodded. "Go." Miriam's heart leapt, but she kept her composure. She ran quickly, her mind racing with relief and awe. She returned with Jochebed, her mother's face veiled with restraint, though her arms longed to cling to the child. The princess placed the baby in her arms. "Take this boy and nurse him for me," she said firmly. "When he is older, bring him to me." That evening, the baby Moses was safe in his mother's embrace again. Miriam sat close, whispering to her brother as he slept, "You were almost lost, little one. But the Lord spared you. One day, you will do great things." In that moment, Miriam understood. Her words had shaped the future. Influence had power. And once tasted, it would be hard to forget. Yet far ahead, like a shadow crossing the years, the same gift of influence that saved Moses would one day lead her into pride and judgment. The river had given Moses back to them, but it had also given Miriam a glimpse of her own voice. Moses grew under the protection of Pharaoh's own daughter, yet for a time he remained in his mother's home. Those early years became precious. Jochebed nursed him, sang to him, and whispered truth into his ears before the palace could shape his heart. But it was Miriam who often hovered near, listening and learning how her baby brother's life was already a story set apart. When Moses laughed or reached for her hand, Miriam's chest filled with pride. She often leaned close to her mother and whispered, "He belongs to God, doesn't he?" Jochebed would answer softly, "Yes, Miriam." He was saved for a purpose. Never forget that. As the seasons passed, Moses grew stronger, and the day came when Jochebed had to bring him back to Pharaoh's household. It was the hardest walk she ever took, up the steps of a palace that served false gods into the hands of a woman who had power over her child's life. Miriam walked beside her, heart pounding. The princess welcomed them, lifting Moses into her arms as if he were her own. "He will be called Moses," she declared, "for I drew him out of the water." The name settled over him like a seal, both Egyptian and Hebrew in sound, bridging two worlds. That night Miriam sat awake in her corner of the small home, listening to her mother's muffled sobs. "He's not ours anymore," Jochebed whispered, "but God will watch him." Miriam clenched her fists. Her voice rose with determination. "Then I'll watch too. If God saved him once, he'll save him again. I'll not stop speaking when he needs a word of truth." Her mother gave her a weary smile. "You already know, child. Your words matter." Years later, Miriam would look back at that vow and realize how much it shaped her. Even as Moses grew among Egyptian teachers, learning their language, their laws, their ways, Miriam kept her place nearby. She walked the edges of the palace courtyards, waiting for glimpses of him. When their eyes met, she reminded him silently with a look, "You are not theirs. You are God's." There were moments when Moses returned home for visits, his voice already picking up the smooth tones of Egyptian tutors. Miriam would sit across from him, arms crossed, and say, "Don't forget who you are, little brother." Moses would grin at her, almost teasing. "How could I?" "You never let me." Her words carried weight. She had saved him at the river. She had watched him in his mother's home, and she believed her voice could steady him even inside Pharaoh's courts. But influence is a dangerous gift. The more Miriam saw how her words could turn hearts, the more she felt the power of it. She did not yet know that one day, the very gift she used to save Moses would be tested in ways that could break her. For now, she only knew this. Her brother had survived, and God's hand was upon him. But the palace was a place of shifting loyalties and cruel powers, and the day would come when Moses would no longer belong to Egypt or to her. The seeds of influence had been planted. Whether they would grow into humility or pride was yet to be seen. The years passed, and Moses grew into manhood. Though Pharaoh's palace raised him with tutors, soldiers, and advisors, the shadow of his Hebrew heritage never left him. Miriam often caught glimpses of him walking in the courtyards with the sons of nobles. He wore fine linen, gold ornaments, and spoke in the polished tongue of Egypt, but his eyes were not theirs. Miriam noticed that he never fully belonged to that world. He carried questions that no tutor could answer, and restlessness that no Egyptian feast could silence. One afternoon, Miriam heard whispers running through the streets of Goshen. "Moses has killed an Egyptian," the people said, their voices trembling. "He struck him down for beating a Hebrew slave." Miriam's heart pounded as she pressed closer to the crowd, trying to hear more. The rumors grew sharper, darker. Pharaoh had heard of it. Soldiers were searching. Moses had fled. That night Miriam sat with her mother in silence. Jochebed's hand shook as she ground flour for bread. She whispered, "I thought he would deliver us. I thought God saved him for this." Miriam stared at the shadows flickering across the wall. "Perhaps he still has," she said softly, though inside her heart was aching. The basket she once guarded at the river had drifted far beyond her reach. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Moses was gone, swallowed by the wilderness. No word returned of him. To many, it seemed his story had ended before it had even begun. But Miriam refused to believe that. Each night she prayed the same prayer. Lord, bring him back. Do not let his life be wasted. He was spared for more than this. In his absence, something unexpected began to stir. Among the women of Israel, Miriam's name rose. She had always been bold with her words, steady with her counsel. Now, as people grieved the loss of hope, they looked to her for strength. She gathered the women together in quiet places, reminding them of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She retold the story of the river, of Pharaoh's daughter, of God's deliverance in the past. Her voice steadied trembling hearts, and her words carried weight in the silence left behind by Moses' disappearance. But weight can be dangerous. Influence is a subtle flame. It can warm, or it can consume. Miriam began to feel its pull more strongly than ever. When she spoke, women listened. When she encouraged, they lifted their heads. She had tasted this power before by the Nile, but now it grew. She had not sought it, but she felt it clinging to her all the same. And in secret she wondered, perhaps she was meant for more. Perhaps the Lord had given her this voice for a greater purpose than merely standing behind others. One evening, as dusk settled over Goshen, Miriam walked alone near the river where her brother had once been hidden. She knelt by the reeds, running her hands through the water. She remembered her promise to her mother, "I will not let him be forgotten." But she also whispered another thought into the stillness. "Lord, if Moses never returns, what then? Who will lead? Who will speak?" The water rippled with no answer. Only silence pressed back at her. That silence would last for many years. Moses remained hidden in Midian, far from Egypt, far from his people. Yet during those long years of absence, Miriam's voice grew louder among the Hebrews. She became a counselor, a singer of hope, a reminder that God was not finished. She was not yet a prophetess in name, but in practice, she was already stepping into the role. Still, as her influence grew, so did a quiet danger within her heart. The basket she once watched had drifted far away, and she no longer had a brother to protect. Now, she guarded her people's hope instead. And the more they trusted her, the more she wondered if she could trust herself with the weight of their faith. The wilderness had claimed Moses, but Egypt still pressed down hard upon her people. Whips cracked, bricks piled higher, and Pharaoh's cruelty deepened. Miriam raised her voice again and again, calling her people not to surrender. But deep inside, her unspoken question lingered. What if I am the one meant to rise? What if the story will not wait for Moses to return? It was a dangerous thought, but she could not shake it. And in the stillness of the years, it took root quietly in her heart. For years, the Hebrews had lived under the weight of Pharaoh's lash, their hope worn thin as old cloth. They had nearly stopped speaking Moses' name, treating him like a fading story from long ago. Only Miriam still whispered his memory in her prayers, asking God to use the boy she once watched float on the river. But even she had begun to wonder if those prayers had slipped into silence. Then one evening, a shock ran through Goshen. Men hurried through the narrow lanes, women lifted their heads from their baskets, and children whispered the name they had almost forgotten. Moses. He has come back. Miriam's breath caught. She pushed her way through the gathering crowd, her heart racing like it had when she was only a girl hiding among the reeds. And there he was. No longer the young man who once killed an Egyptian in anger, but an older, weathered figure. His Egyptian finery was gone, replaced with the plain garments of a shepherd. His hair was streaked with gray, but his eyes, oh, his eyes carried something no one could ignore: fire, purpose. Beside him stood Aaron, his brother, staff in hand. But it was Moses who raised his arm and spoke with a voice that silenced the murmurs of the people. "The Lord has heard your cries," he declared, his voice steady as stone. "He has sent me to deliver you." The words struck like lightning through the crowd. Some gasped, some fell to their knees, and others stared with disbelief. Miriam felt her knees weaken. All the years of silence, all the nights of prayer, all the ache of waiting, and now he stood here, claiming the call of God himself. That night, their family gathered in secret. Miriam studied him closely, searching for the brother she once knew. His face was roughened by wilderness winds, his voice slower but carrying weight. Aaron leaned forward, eager, recounting the vision of the burning bush, the signs Moses had been given, the command to confront Pharaoh himself. Miriam spoke at last, her voice trembling. "We thought you were gone forever." "I was," Moses admitted, his eyes steady. "But God was not finished. He found me. He has sent me back for his people." Jochebed reached to touch her son's face, tears streaking her cheeks. "Then I will believe," she whispered. "The Lord who spared you as a child will spare us now." Miriam said nothing more, but long after the others slept, she lay awake. Pride swelled in her heart that her brother had been chosen, but another feeling tugged at her soul. For years the people had leaned on her voice. She had carried their hope, held them together, reminded them not to forget their God. Now, with a single appearance, all eyes were turning toward Moses. Was this what she had prayed for? Or was this the moment her voice would fade into silence? In the days that followed, she saw the power that God gave him. She watched as Moses stood before Pharaoh, staff in hand, speaking words that shook the court. "Let my people go." She saw the river turn to blood, frogs swarm the land, and dust become gnats. The gods of Egypt trembled before the power of the God of Israel, and the people began to whisper Moses' name in awe. Miriam lifted her head in pride at first, proud to be his sister. But as the plagues grew and the spotlight of leadership blazed hotter on Moses, a shadow stirred in her heart. The people spoke less of the songs she had led and more of the wonders Moses performed. She had once been the girl who saved him from the Nile, but now he was the man saving all of Israel. One evening, she slipped away to the same riverbank where she had once stood watch over the basket. She knelt by the water, whispering into the night, "Lord, what is my place now? Am I only meant to watch while he rises?" The water rippled without answer, but inside her heart a dangerous thought took root, one she could not yet admit aloud. Perhaps I was meant for more. The basket she had once guarded had drifted far downstream, and now the brother she had saved was leading a nation. And Miriam, caught between pride and purpose, felt a battle rising in her own soul. The plagues had shaken Egypt to its core. The Nile had bled red, frogs and gnats had overrun the land, darkness had swallowed the sun, and hail had shattered crops. Each time Pharaoh bent, he hardened again, refusing to let the Hebrews go. The people of Israel were restless, caught between fear and hope. And in the midst of it, Miriam kept close watch on Moses, on the people, and on her own rising unease. One evening, Moses called the elders together in haste. Miriam slipped in at the back of the gathering, straining to hear. Aaron stood beside his brother, holding a staff, his voice ringing out. "This month shall be the beginning for you. Each family will take a lamb, perfect and without blemish. You will kill it at twilight and mark your doorposts with its blood. When the Lord passes through Egypt tonight, he will strike down the firstborn of the land, but where he sees the blood, he will pass over. Gasps filled the room. The elders looked at each other in disbelief. Blood on the doorposts? One muttered. Another whispered, and the Lord himself will strike. Moses' voice cut through their fear. Do exactly as he has commanded. There is no other protection. Only the Lord can cover you. When the elders dispersed to tell the people, Miriam caught up to Moses, gripping his arm. Brother, do you hear what you're saying? The Lord himself is coming to judge. What if the people are too afraid to obey? What if they mock the command? Moses met her eyes, calm yet fierce. Then their homes will not be spared. Miriam, this is not my word, it is the Lord's. He has spoken, and he will do it. Her throat tightened. And what of us? Will he truly pass over us? Aaron placed his hand on her shoulder. Sister, he has spared us before. Trust him now. That night was unlike any other. Families gathered inside their homes, hurriedly roasting lamb, eating with sandals strapped and staffs in hand, ready to leave. In Miriam's house, Jochebed's wrinkled hands trembled as she brushed blood across the doorway. Miriam stood beside her, whispering prayers she barely understood. Hezekiah, a neighbor's boy, clutched her sleeve and whispered, "Will it really work?" Miriam forced her voice to sound strong. Yes, the Lord sees the blood. He will protect us. But inside, her stomach churned. As midnight drew near, a thick silence spread over Egypt as if the very air were holding its breath. Miriam sat with her family, the lamb smell heavy in the room, the cries of children hushed to whispers. Suddenly, a sound pierced the stillness, first faint, then louder. Wailing, screams. From the palace to the alleys, a wave of grief broke across Egypt. Miriam covered her ears, tears springing to her eyes. Lord, have mercy! She could hear mothers wailing for their sons, fathers crying out in disbelief, and yet in the Hebrew homes there was no cry, not one. The blood had marked them. The Lord had passed over. Moses stood in the doorway, his face pale but resolute. A knock rattled the door, and when Aaron opened it, a messenger stood trembling. Pharaoh summons you, he gasped. He says, Go, leave us, take your people, and serve your God. For a moment, no one moved. Then Miriam gripped Moses' hand, her voice hoarse. This is it, isn't it? This is the deliverance we prayed for all these years. Moses nodded, but his eyes were heavy with both triumph and sorrow. Yes, the Lord has broken Pharaoh's heart. We must leave now before he changes his mind again. Miriam turned to her mother, her hands shaking. Do you hear, mother? He said, Go. We're leaving Egypt. Jochebed's eyes filled with tears, her voice quivering with both joy and fear. Then let us go quickly, child. The Lord has moved his hand. The camp erupted into motion, families bundling bread before it could rise, gathering belongings, rushing into the night. The sound of crying still echoed from Egyptian homes, a grim reminder of what God had done. Miriam hurried among the women, urging them to move quickly, whispering courage to their children. Yet even as she worked, her heart was torn. She had longed for this night. She had sung of it, prayed for it, held the people's hope when Moses was gone. But now, when freedom finally came, it was Moses' staff that had struck the Nile, Moses' words Pharaoh had heard, Moses' command the people obeyed. The weight of leadership had shifted fully onto him. As they stepped into the darkness of the road leaving Egypt behind, Miriam whispered into the night, "Lord, you have delivered us. But what place is left for me?" The wind carried no answer, only the cries of Egypt fading behind them, and the endless desert opening before them. The march out of Egypt was hurried, chaotic, and filled with both trembling and laughter. The Hebrews staggered under bundles of bread, leading children half asleep carrying bowls, jars, and treasures the Egyptians had pressed into their hands. They were free at last. Yet freedom tasted strange, almost fragile, as if Pharaoh might change his mind with the rising sun. Days into their journey, that fear proved real. Word spread like wildfire. Pharaoh's chariots thundered across the desert, his army racing after them. The people panicked, their cries filling the camp. Why did Moses bring us out here? Were there not graves in Egypt enough for us? Fear twisted into anger and their voices turned sharp. Miriam's heart pounded as she ran to the edge of the camp. She saw it with her own eyes, dust rising on the horizon, wheels clattering, swords glinting in the light. Pharaoh's fury was bearing down upon them. Behind her lay only the sea, its waves crashing against the shore. They were trapped. The people surged toward Moses, shouting, accusing, but Moses lifted his staff high, his voice carrying across the wind. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord today. The Egyptians you see now, you will never see again." Miriam's breath caught. She had heard her brother speak before, but never with such authority. She turned toward the sea as he raised his staff. The waters roared, and then they split. Walls of water rose on either side, the seabed stretching open before them, a path wide and dry. The people gasped, too stunned to move at first until Moses shouted, "Go forward!" Miriam grabbed the hands of the women nearest her. "Run! Take your children! Do not look back!" Her own voice carried with urgency, and the women clung to her, following her lead into the path between walls of water. She ran, heart racing, the spray of the sea cool on her face as thousands poured through the parted waves. Behind them, the thunder of Pharaoh's chariots entered the sea as well. The sound grew louder, closer. Miriam could hear the shouts of soldiers, the pounding of hooves, the clash of metal. Fear clawed at her chest, but still she pressed forward, urging others on. "Do not stop! Keep moving!" And then, as the last of Israel stepped onto the far shore, Moses stretched out his staff once more. The walls of water trembled, then collapsed. The sea roared shut, swallowing Pharaoh's army in a furious wave. Chariots, horses, soldiers, all vanished beneath the raging waters. Silence followed, broken only by the crash of waves rolling back into place. For a moment, the people stood stunned, hardly daring to believe what they had seen. Then cries of joy erupted. They shouted, laughed, and fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the power of God. Miriam felt her own knees buckle, tears streaming down her face. They were free, truly free. Egypt's grip had been broken forever. It was then that Miriam did what she had always done. She lifted her voice. Taking a tambourine in her hand, she began to sing. Her voice rang clear, strong, carried by the wind. "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." The women gathered around her, tambourines clashing, feet dancing. Their voices joined hers, rising in chorus until the air shook with song. Miriam led them, arms lifted high, eyes blazing with joy. She was no longer the girl hiding among reeds. She was a leader, a prophetess, her voice commanding the celebration of an entire nation. Moses stood watching from a distance, his face solemn yet pleased. Aaron smiled, clapping in rhythm. But Miriam felt something else stir in her chest as the crowd followed her lead. For a moment her heart swelled not only with praise but with power. The people's eyes were on her, their voices echoing her own. Her influence was no longer hidden in shadows, it was blazing in the open. That night, as the camp settled on the far shore, Miriam lay awake, the sound of her own song still ringing in her ears. She whispered into the darkness, "Lord, you gave me this voice." And they followed me. They listened. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps my place is greater than even Moses knows." It was a dangerous thought, and yet it clung to her heart, as unshakable as the rhythm of the tambourine in her hand. The Red Sea was behind them, but the wilderness stretched endlessly ahead. At first, the people marched with joy, singing snatches of Miriam's song, repeating Moses' words of victory. But celebration fades quickly when thirst begins to gnaw at the throat and hunger twists the stomach. The desert was merciless, and soon the joy of deliverance gave way to murmurs of complaint. 3 days passed without water. The children whimpered, the animals stumbled, and the camp grew restless. When at last they found a spring, its waters were bitter, undrinkable. Anger spread like fire. Men shouted at Moses, women clutched their children, voices rose in despair. Miriam stood among the women trying to steady them. "Wait, he will act," she said. But her own throat was dry and doubt prickled her heart. The women looked at her, not Moses, their eyes demanding answers. "What will he do?" they asked. She turned, watching her brother. Moses stood alone, staff in hand, his face lifted toward heaven. Then, at the Lord's command, he cast a piece of wood into the spring, and the waters turned sweet. The people rushed forward, drinking, laughing, praising. For the moment, their faith returned. That night, around the campfires, Miriam listened as voices told the story of what Moses had done. He struck the water and it changed. He called upon the Lord, and the Lord answered him. She smiled, but a faint sting pressed at her chest. Had they forgotten so quickly who had led them in song, whose voice had lifted their spirits at the sea? Days later, when hunger struck and the camp again groaned with despair, God sent manna, thin flakes like dew across the ground. Once more the people looked to Moses for instruction, and once more they obeyed. Miriam joined the gathering, kneeling to scoop the strange food into her hands. She tasted it, sweet like honey, and marveled. "See what the Lord has given through Moses!" a woman exclaimed. Miriam forced a smile, but inside the quiet question whispered again. Through Moses. Was it not the same Lord who gave me a voice to lead? As weeks turned to months, the people's complaints became constant. At every trial, water, food, enemies, their eyes turned to Moses. Miriam watched, sometimes proud, sometimes uneasy. She loved her brother, but she also felt the weight of her own influence. Women gathered around her in the evenings, asking for counsel, seeking her voice, and often she gave it. One night, as the stars glimmered over the desert, a group of women sat close, whispering of their struggles. "We love Moses, yes, one said, "but does he listen to us? He speaks, and we obey. But it is you, Miriam, who sings with us, who eats beside us, who understands us." Miriam's heart quickened. She tried to brush the words aside. "He is the Lord's chosen." But the women pressed further. "And are you not chosen too? Did not God give you a voice that stirred all Israel to sing? You lead us as surely as he does." The words lingered long after the women left. Miriam lay awake, staring into the night, unable to silence them. Was it pride that stirred in her heart, or was it truth? The desert was testing them all. Moses bore the burden of leading the nation, but Miriam now bore the burden of whispers, the weight of a people beginning to look to her in ways they should not. And though she still prayed, still sang, she could not escape the thought that perhaps her voice was meant for more than songs. As the camp settled into uneasy rest, a faint wind stirred the tents. Miriam closed her eyes, hearing again the voices of the women. "You lead us as surely as he does." And for the first time, she did not try to silence them. The camp of Israel stretched across the desert floor, thousands of tents glowing faintly under the moonlight. Fires crackled, children's laughter drifted in the air, but beneath it all there was tension. Complaints had become the rhythm of the people, about food, about water, about the endless march. And though God provided again and again, the people's eyes kept turning to Moses, demanding more, blaming more, expecting more. Miriam felt it too. She sat near the fire with Aaron one evening, listening to the murmur of the camp. A group of women passed by, their voices carrying, "Moses commands, and we obey. But who commands Moses? Does he answer to no one?" The words were hushed but heavy, and Miriam's heart gave a small, dangerous tug. Aaron shifted uncomfortably beside her. "The people grumble too much," he muttered. Miriam's eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps they only say what we have thought ourselves. Moses acts as if he alone carries the voice of God. But has the Lord not spoken through us also?" Aaron hesitated, his fingers tightening around his staff. "You have a point, sister. When you sing, the people follow. When you speak, they listen. And I am the priest of this people. Am I not chosen as well? But Moses walks apart, as if none of us could stand beside him." Miriam leaned closer, her voice low but sharp. "We carried this people in Egypt. We bore their cries in the wilderness. Did he not vanish for years while we suffered, and now he claims the Lord speaks only to him?" Aaron sighed deeply. "It is hard, yes. But are you sure your heart is not stirred by envy?" The question stung. Miriam's eyes flashed. "Envy, number, justice. The Lord has given me a voice, Aaron. He gave me the song at the sea. He raised me to steady the women, to carry their burdens. And yet Moses receives all the honor, all the praise, as if no one else matters. If leadership belongs only to him, then why did God give gifts to us?" Aaron was silent, but the thought had taken root in both their minds. They spoke little else that night, but the weight of Miriam's words hung heavy between them. The next day, whispers began to spread. Miriam's sharp question echoed from tent to tent. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not also spoken through us? Some repeated it with indignation, others with curiosity, but all felt the tension it created. For the first time, the people dared to imagine that Moses might not stand alone, that perhaps others could lead with equal voice. That evening, as the camp quieted, Moses walked among the tents, unaware of the storm building in the shadows. He prayed aloud. his voice carrying over the desert winds. But Miriam stood apart, arms crossed, the whispers she had unleashed now swirling around her like embers waiting for flame. The question was no longer whispered in her own heart. It was spoken aloud, carried into the ears of Israel, too heavy to pull back, too sharp to silence. And unseen by all, the Lord himself had heard. The whispers had spread far, and the camp of Israel was restless. Miriam had not meant for her words to scatter so quickly, but once spoken, they traveled like sparks in dry grass. Some agreed with her, saying, "Yes, the Lord has spoken through others, not Moses alone." Others shook their heads in fear, unwilling to question the man who called down plagues and parted seas. Aaron avoided Moses that morning, his mind heavy with unease. Miriam, however, felt a strange mixture of fear and pride. She had finally said what many had thought. She had finally drawn into the open what had stirred in her heart for so long. But before the sun climbed high, a voice thundered across the camp. It was not the voice of Moses, nor Aaron, nor even the crowd. It was a voice that shook the very ground. "Moses, Aaron, Miriam, come to the tent of meeting." The sound froze the camp. People fell silent, heads turning, eyes wide. Mothers clutched their children, men bowed to the ground. The summons had come from the Lord himself. Miriam's legs felt heavy as stone, yet she forced them to move. Aaron walked beside her, pale and trembling. Moses followed, his face solemn, his eyes lowered in humility. The three siblings approached the sacred place, the hush of thousands pressing in behind them. The tent of meeting loomed before them, its curtains rippling in the desert wind, and then, suddenly, a pillar of cloud descended, thick and blinding, settling at the entrance. The air crackled with holy fire. The voice of the Lord rang out, thundering with power. "Listen to my words. When a prophet of the Lord is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" The words struck like blows. Miriam staggered under their weight, her pride stripped bare. Aaron fell to his knees weeping. Moses stood still, trembling yet silent, for he dared not speak. The cloud lifted, but the air still trembled with judgment. Slowly, Aaron turned toward his sister and gasped in horror. Miriam's skin was as white as snow. Leprosy covered her, raw and terrible. Her proud face crumbled as she looked at her hands, her arms, her body now marked with shame. A cry rose from the people who saw, and fear rippled through the camp. Aaron fell before Moses, his voice broken with desperation. "Please, my Lord, I beg you, do not hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like one dead, half-eaten as she comes from the womb." Moses lifted his eyes to heaven, his voice raw with grief. "Oh God, please heal her, please." But the answer came with finality. Miriam must bear her shame. She would be confined outside the camp, cut off for 7 days, her pride exposed before all of Israel. Only then would she be restored. The people murmured, torn between sorrow and fear. Miriam covered her face, trembling, her heart breaking. The voice that once led a nation in song was silenced in disgrace. As she was led away beyond the camp's edge, every eye followed her. The sister who had saved Moses at the river, who had sung at the sea, who had whispered hope in the desert, now stood alone, cast out. her skin burning with the mark of her pride. The desert winds howled around her as she stumbled outside the camp, her voice no longer strong but broken. The camp of Israel moved slowly those 7 days. They could not continue their journey without Miriam, for the presence of God made it clear. His people would not move forward while she remained outside, so the entire nation waited. Thousands of tents pitched in the desert, families going about their days, all with one eye glancing toward the edge of the camp where Miriam sat alone. Her leprosy burned not only on her skin, but in her soul. Each day she rose to the sound of children playing far beyond her reach. Each night she lay under the stars, listening to the muffled songs of worship rising from within the camp, songs she herself had once led. She wrapped herself in silence, her heart weighed down by the memory of her own words. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? At first her spirit raged. She thought of all she had done, how she saved Moses at the river, how she lifted her voice at the Red Sea, how she steadied the women when they faltered. Was she not worthy of honor? Did her gifts not matter? But as the days dragged on, pride gave way to grief, and grief turned to humility. On the 7th day, as the sun set in red and gold, a messenger came from the camp. The Lord has lifted his hand. Miriam may return. Her heart leapt, though her body trembled. She wrapped herself in her cloak and walked slowly back toward the camp. Families lined the path, watching her approach. Some eyes were filled with relief, others with sorrow, all with awe. She had been marked by God's judgment, but now she returned as one restored. Aaron was the first to meet her, his face streaked with tears. He embraced her tightly, whispering, "Sister, you are home." Moses stood beside him, his eyes gentle. "You were always precious to us," he said softly. "But now you are precious in a new way. You have walked where few could endure." Miriam bowed her head, her voice trembling. "I was foolish. I thought my voice was greater than my obedience. I thought my influence made me equal with God's command, but now I know. Leadership is a gift, and without humility, it becomes dangerous." That night, for the first time in many days, Miriam sat among the women again. They looked at her not with scorn, but with solemn respect. Some reached for her hands, scarred yet healed. And Miriam spoke not with pride, but with gentleness. "Sing to the Lord, not to me. Follow his word, not mine. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this: God alone is holy, and we are his servants." In the days that followed, Israel continued its journey through the wilderness. Miriam no longer sought to rival her brother. Instead, she walked beside her people, guiding the women, teaching the children, reminding them of the God who had spared them at the river, the sea, and the desert. Her voice still rose in song, but it carried a different weight now. Not the weight of pride, but the beauty of humility. And though her years would pass like the sand beneath her feet, her story remained. A sister who saved a brother, a prophetess who sang of victory, a woman struck with leprosy and restored by mercy. Her life whispered a truth Israel could not forget. Leadership is a gift, but influence without humility can become dangerous.